Hello, and welcome to Digital Dorsey. My name is Ken Dorsey, and my call sign is Kilo Alpha 8 Oscar Alpha Delta. Today I'm back in the shack, and for this episode I would like to discuss configuring the ICOM Remote RSBA1 version 2 software for use with a VPN so that you can connect to your newer model ICOM transceiver over the internet across a public network. So what is a VPN? Well, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. And basically what a VPN does is it allows your private network to extend across the internet and enables you to send and receive data across shared or public networks as if you are actually connected directly to your home or private network. For this demonstration, I'm going to be concentrating mostly on the IC-7300 because that seems to be the radio that most people always ask about as far as remote connectivity. So just a couple of things first. On the IC-7300, we will have to configure our host computer to connect to the 7300. To do that, and to connect to a lot of the ICOM transceivers, you will need a USB cable, and it's going to be a USB-B to a USB-A cable. So here's the cable. I apologize, the lighting isn't the greatest, but one of these connections is your standard USB-A connector, and that's the connection that most people are familiar with. That's the rectangular connector. Can't see it very well here. And then the other connector that you'll need for the radio side is a USB-B connector. Now the USB-B connector is a more square connector. So that's the USB-B connector, and that will plug into the USB port on the back of the transceiver. Now you also notice this cable that I'm using here happens to come with a couple of ferrite beads very close to the connectors. Now it's really not necessary to have the ferrite beads on the cables, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. So if you can find a cable, a USB cable that has ferrite beads already installed, that would be great. So I'm going to break here, and I'm going to go to the computers, my host computer in my shack, and we're going to set up the RSBA1 software. Okay, so before using the USB cable to plug your ICOM transceiver into your host computer, you want to make sure you first download the proper driver for that transceiver. Now the drivers can be found on the ICOM website. If you just go out to the ICOM site here and pick your transceiver, in this case we're going to talk about a 7300. So you're going to click on the transceiver up at the top of the website. And once the web page comes up, then you'll see a picture of the transceiver, and along the side there's a bunch of options under the features box. And one of those features options at the very bottom says firmware software. So we want to click on the firmware software, and then it'll come up with this firmware software link here. And that firmware software link will then show you a couple of different drivers. Now you want to download the latest version. So the current version as of this video is 1.30. So you want to just use the 1.30 version. It shows you the various different radios that can be used with this driver. The 7100 all the way up to the R8600 receiver, and then most of the radios in between. So you're just going to click on this link with the model names. That's going to take you yet to another page, and it's going to verify again, what models this driver supports. So make sure that you're downloading the driver that is supported, for your radio. And you're going to scroll down, and all the way at the bottom, you're going to have to check mark the I have read and fully understand the agree to the above. So there's a little thing to read here, but you want to go ahead and read that, and then click that you have fully understood and agree to it. And then you're going to click the download link just below that. And of course, you're going to just download the file. Now the file is just going to be a zip file. We'll go ahead and download that file. Alright, so once the driver has been downloaded, then you'll need to unzip the zip file. I unzipped it just to my desktop, and you can see on my desktop here that once you unzip the zip file, it creates another folder called driver. So if you open that driver folder, you'll see two folders in there. One is labeled Win 7, 8, 1, 10, and one is labeled Win 10. If you have Windows 7 or Windows 8.1, then you want to use the driver in this folder. If you have Windows 10, don't use the driver in the Windows 7, 8, 1, 10 folder. Instead, use the driver in the Windows 10 folder. It's a newer driver, so you want to use that driver. Now, I happen to be running Windows 10, so I'm going to open the Windows 10 folder. And in the folders, either one, you'll see two executable files labeled VCP installer. One says x64 and one says x86. Now that's the operating system that you're running. If it's a 64-bit Windows 10 OS, then you want to use the x64 installer. If it's a 32-bit Windows 10 installation, then you want to use the x86 install. So x64 for 64-bit, x86 for 32-bit operating systems. So select the driver of your choice and then just double-click that driver to launch it and install it. Now, I'm not going to do it on my system here because I already have it installed, so there's no need to. But that's the driver installation procedure. Once the driver is installed, then you can go ahead and plug your transceiver into your host computer. Once you've plugged your transceiver into your host computer, you should hear the host computer beep a couple times to signify a new USB device has been detected, and it will probably say something like USB new device hardware detected, installing driver, something along that line. But you should get some verification that it has seen the radio and it is installing the driver. Now, to verify the driver has been installed, all you need to do is go to Device Manager, and if you go down through your Device Manager to where it says Ports, there'll be a Ports, COM, and LPT. If you open that by clicking on the little arrow right in front of the ports, it'll expand that. And you should see a Silicon Labs CP210X USB to UART bridge. Now, if you don't see that, then something went wrong. The device, your host, is not seeing your radio for some reason. You must have this driver in here loaded up as a serial port. Now, my serial port happens to be set for COM18. That may not be your serial port. You may have like COM3 or COM4. If you're using a 7300, you're only going to have one of these virtual serial ports. If you're using some of the other radios, 9100 or 7610, you may actually see two of these virtual serial ports. But on a 7300, you're only going to see one. And again, mine's named COM18. If for some reason this didn't load, then you need to go back. You may have to go back and reload the driver and try it again, or try a different USB cable. Generally speaking, either a USB cable or a failed driver install is usually the cause of this not working right, but you may have to do a little bit of detective work to figure out why the radio wasn't detected by your host computer. So once we have determined that the host PC can see the transceiver and the host PC has set up a virtual COM port to talk to the transceiver, our next step is to install the ICOM RS BA1 version 2 software. Now, this software can be purchased from any ICOM dealer. DX Engineering sells the software, as you can see here on the screen. And I get asked a lot about the licensing requirements. Do you need to purchase a separate disk for each PC you're installing it on? Well, I checked on ICOM's website for the software, and I can find nothing as far as licensing agreements that state, one way or the other. And it's been my experience. I purchased the software, one copy, and I have loaded it on multiple PCs. I have it on my host PC, and I have it loaded on 3 separate laptops that I use for my remote systems. And I have not had a problem with just one of the licensed copy of the software installing. So it will install on multiple PCs. I think you're okay as long as you're using the software for your own personal use on your own personal PCs. I think it is fine to install it on multiple systems. There's no, at least in the software, there's nothing that prevents you from doing that. So once you have installed the software, you will see two new icons on your desktop. The first icon will be the ICOM remote utility, and the second icon will be the RSBA1 remote control version 2 software. And those should be available as soon as you install. Now, I just used the default installation. I didn't do anything custom. The default seems to work just fine, and it creates the icons on your desktop. Okay, so once the ICOM remote utility has been installed, then we can go ahead and configure the host PC to connect to the radio. Go ahead and click on the icon for the ICOM remote utility on your desktop, and you should see a splash screen come up that says ICOM remote utility, and then it should come into this remote utility setup screen. Now, it does have a setup wizard. To be honest, I've never had any success with the setup wizard, so I just generally ignore the setup wizard, and I'm going to just do this manually and show you how to do it manually. So the first thing you want to do, just close that setup window and go to Options, Local Server Settings, and then in the Registered Radio List tab, which will be the tab that comes up, go ahead and at the bottom of that screen click Add. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we are going to add a radio, and we want that to be accessible from other PCs. So you want to make sure that it's selected to be accessible from other PCs. I believe that is the default. Click on Next, and it's going to show you in USB that this is the radio name and the COM port number, which again in my case was COM 18. Now if this doesn't come up populated, you can do a search and it should find the USB port with the radio. That's usually not the case. I've usually always had this come up correctly with the radio, but there is an option to do a search. You don't want to do a manual. That's for other transceivers. That's if something really doesn't work, you can manually configure it, but generally speaking, like I said, the USB works fine. So we'll click Next on that. The address, baud rate, those should be the defaults for the radio defaults. Now if you've gone out and changed your CIV address or your CIV baud rate, then you may have, in the radio, then you may have to either change them here or go back and set them back to the defaults in the radio, which is address 94 and baud rate 115.200. The COM port number is already set, so that doesn't allow you to change yet. So now the next thing we need to do is add a registered user. So go to the registered users, click Add, and I usually just put in my call sign for the user ID and then a password for the server. Now make sure you remember that password because you will need to use that again later on. So we're going to hit OK there. We're going to highlight registered users, and we're going to click this little Add To button in the center between registered users and accessible users. We'll click the Add, and that is going to bring my registered users over to my accessible users, which means I'll definitely have access to the radio. And then Next, and it just puts in a default radio name. You can change that to whatever you want if you so desire, but I usually just leave it at the default. Hit Next. Now it's going to come up with this sound settings option. If you click on the sound settings, this is actually your system sound. So let me grab that here. So it's going to bring up your system sound box. All you really want to see is that speakers are set for USB audio codec as the default communications device. And then that's in playback, and then in the recording tab you want to make sure that the microphone is set for USB audio codec as your default device. So those are the two things to look for just to verify those are correct. And usually they are. I've never run into a situation where they weren't properly set up. So once that's completed, hit finish, and now you'll see this public radio here, and that's the actual registered radio. And in user management, you'll see the user management stuff that we set up. So once those two things are completed, you can go ahead and close that window. And now you'll see a radio in the radio list. You won't see a server yet, but you'll see a radio. So if you do a connect now to the radio, and you turn the radio on first, and then do a connect, it's going to say serial port number is 18, okay, and you should start hearing radio noise out of your host computer. So once the host computer is connected like that, now you should be able to run the RSBA1 remote control software, just as a verification that you can actually connect to the radio and control it. Make sure in the options you go out and set, the model should be already set, the connection should already be set to USB, the remote utility should be not used. I'll make sure you set the COM port to the correct COM port, and your baud rate should be already at 115.2, as is the CIV address. Now again, if you change these addresses on the radio and you made changes, then you're going to have to make sure those changes are all up here. They're all displayed. It says 115.2 BPS, CIV address is 94, COM port number is 18. So just make sure that these numbers match those numbers. Once that's done, okay that configuration box and hit connect, and you should almost instantaneously connect to the radio. And now I should be able to control the radio. And there's the radio coming off of the speakers on the host PC. So that just verifies everything works. Now if I disconnect, if I click on this connect button up here in the remote control software, that will disconnect, and that actually will shut down the 7300. So the 7300 has now powered off, and you can see I no longer have any audio coming out of the 7300. Now if I reconnect, then it will turn the 7300 back on, and I will reconnect. So now that we've verified everything is working locally on our host PC, it's time to actually set up a connection for the outside world. So we're going to set up a server now, because currently the way we're configured, we can talk to the radio either via the USB port or from our local network. But if we want to try to get into the radio from the outside world on the internet via a connection that is not local, we need to have a server running in order to connect to that system. So I'm going to go ahead and close the RSBA1 remote control software for now, get that out of the way. So to create a new server, there's a tab next to the radio list that says server list. So click on that tab, and you'll notice that that server list window currently has nothing in it. So what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a server by just clicking on the add button. And the first thing that's going to come up is going to come up with server address or network name. Now what it's asking for here basically is the IP address of your host PC or the network name of your network. Now I find it easier just to find the IP address of the host PC in most cases. So if you know what that is, go ahead and put your IP address in there. If not, it's very easy to find the IP address of your host PC by just typing in the taskbar under Windows. There's a search box. If you type in that search box CMD, you'll find this command prompt window. If you click on that, it's going to open a window that is going to be your command prompt window. Bring it over. And it's going to look like this. So what we want to do at that blinking cursor, we just want to go ahead and key in ICOM FIG, ipconfig, and then hit enter, and that should show you your Windows IP configuration. So what we're looking for is a line that says IPv4 address. That's the IP address of your host PC. So look for IPv4 address, and then over to the right, there should be 4 sets of numbers separated by a period. So what you want to do is you want to key those numbers into that server address field just exactly as it's shown on that command prompt screen. So you want to key in the exact same numbers, including the periods. And by the way, I'm going to have all of this stuff grayed out to keep my personal information personal. So once you've done that, you can close the command prompt window and then go ahead and hit next. And now it's going to ask you for your user ID and your password. So this is the same user ID and password we used when we first set up the radio. The one I told you to remember what the password was. And once it has taken the password and your login, then it's going to give you a server description. And the server description name is just going to be the same IP address, the same numbers that were in the IP address, only they're going to be separated by like a underbar. So go ahead and hit finish, and now you should see a server in there that should say connected, and it should have the IP address of the host PC, and it should be named as that IP address. So that's it for the remote utility, and we'll go on to the VPN. If you don't have a VPN on your host computer, there are several VPN services out there that you can look into. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to go through one that I happen to use. I'm not endorsing it as a product. I just use it and it works well for me, and that's called TeamViewer. The nice thing about TeamViewer is it is a free application as long as you're using it for personal use only. You do not have to purchase the software. Just download it, and it's a free download. So I have their website up here, and I'm going to just click download for free, and as soon as you click the download will immediately begin and start on your computer, and you just save the executable file. It'll say TeamViewer _setup. Go ahead and save that file, then run the executable. And once you've run the executable, you'll see another icon on your desktop labeled TeamViewer. Go ahead and click on that icon to launch the application, and the TeamViewer app will come up. Now, when it comes up initially, it does not have the VPN drivers installed, so you need to go out and make a change to the system. You go to Extras, go to Options. Once in Options, on the left hand side at the very bottom, click on Advanced, and then on the right side click on Show Advanced Options, and scroll down through those options until you get to an option that says Advanced Network Settings. So this Advanced Network Settings box, look for that. And then in the network settings, you'll see Install VPN Driver. And over on the right hand side, you'll see a button to install it. So go ahead and click that Install button. And it says the TeamViewer VPN adapter was installed successfully on your system. OK that. Go ahead and close the options box. Now you see you will have a VPN option selected over here on the right hand side of the software. And that's it. You're done right now for the VPN, and we'll go ahead and set everything up for the remote. Now that we have finished configuring the host PC, it is time to move on to the remote PC. So for this demonstration, I'm going to be using a laptop as my remote PC, and this laptop is actually connected to a completely different network than my host PC. So I will actually be using the internet to connect to the host PC over my laptop. So this is a real-time demonstration of an actual connection via the internet using the VPN to connect to the radio on the host PC. So the first thing we will need to do on our remote PC, of course, is install the software that we installed on the host. So you'll need to install the ICOM RSBA1 version 2 software. And if you're using TeamViewer for your VPN, then you will need to also install the TeamViewer software. So once the TeamViewer software and the ICOM software is installed, go ahead and open the TeamViewer by clicking on the icon on the desktop, and that should launch the TeamViewer window here. And if you notice under Control Remote Computer, again, we do not have a VPN. So the first thing we need to do is install the VPN driver so we have a VPN connection. So to do that, again, go to Extras, go to Options. At the very bottom, click on Advanced, and then on the right, click on Show Advanced Options. Scroll down until you find Advanced Network Settings, and under Advanced Network Settings, look for Install VPN Driver, and to the right of that, you will see a button that says Install, so go ahead and click on that button to install the driver. And it should come back and say the TeamViewer VPN adapter was installed successfully on your system. So we'll go ahead and OK that, and we can close this window. So now you'll see we do have the VPN available on this TeamViewer. So the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to put the partner ID of your host PC into the partner ID box on your remote. So if you look at TeamViewer on your host PC, under Allow Remote Control, it should say Your ID. That's the ID that TeamViewer has given to the host PC. So we want to key that ID into the partner ID box. So we're going to key that in. And then once that's keyed in, we're going to go ahead and hit Connect. And it's going to come back and prompt us for a password. Now the password under TeamViewer on your host PC, right under your ID, it'll say password. So that's the password you're going to key in to connect. Now one thing I want to just caution you about, if you close TeamViewer and reopen or restart TeamViewer, it generates a new password every time you close and open TeamViewer. So if you close TeamViewer on your host and you reopen it, it's going to generate a new password. Okay? The partner ID will always stay the same. Your partner ID will never change, but the password will change whenever you shut down and restart TeamViewer. So just something to think about. So I'm going to go ahead, I've got the password in that it's telling me on TeamViewer on my host. So I'm going to hit log in or log on. And if things go well, you should get this new pop-up box, and in the status window it should say VPN is running, and it should have your IP, IP of partner, and some additional information. So I'm going to close, or I'm going to minimize the large window here. I'm not going to close it. I'm just going to minimize the large window because I don't need it open for now. But I'm not going to minimize this small window because I am going to need this IP address of the partner. So we're going to go over to the ICOM remote utility now, and we're going to launch the ICOM remote utility by double clicking on the icon. And of course it's going to come up with Setup Wizard. Just close the Setup Wizard. And if you notice, radio list box is empty and server list box is empty. Now, configuring the remote is a little bit easier because we don't have to configure a radio on the remote side. All we need to do is configure a server, and once we're connected to the server on the host PC, it will automatically bring over most of the information that is set up for the radio on the host PC. So go ahead and click on the Server List tab, and at the bottom of the window, click on the Add button. And it's going to come up and it's going to ask for a server address or network name. So for the server address, you're going to key in IP of partner that it shows in this TeamViewer box. So you're going to key in the IP of the partner. That's the IP address that VPN the TeamViewer VPN assigned to your host PC. Now, if you're using a different VPN, then just use the IP address that your VPN assigns to the host PC. I'm keying in the IP of the partner and exactly the way it's shown, with the periods between each set of numbers. Once that's keyed in, I can go ahead and minimize this window because I don't need it anymore. And on the server information window, I can go ahead and click on Next. Now it's going to ask for user ID and password. So this is the user ID and the password that we originally set up when we first configured the radio on the host PC side. So you remember I said don't forget what that password is when you create it. So hopefully you still remember what the password is. Hopefully I still remember what my password is. The user ID, I use my call sign. And the password, and go ahead and click Next. And it should say connecting to server, and then it should say server description, and it should have the IP address that we just put in, but with instead of periods, it's going to have underbars between each set of numbers. And that is just a name for the server that they use. I don't generally change that name. So go ahead and hit finish. And now you should see that we have a server. It's connected, which means it's actually connected to our host PC, to the server on the host PC. And again, it has the IP address information as the server name and the IP information for the address. Same IP for that we used from TeamViewer. Now, if you go to radio list, you'll see that the radio has already been populated. So we haven't had to generate a new radio. The only thing that doesn't get generated is a virtual COM port number, and that's because we're using a different PC, so we can select a different virtual COM port if we so desire. So you do need to select a virtual COM port. So click on that radio to highlight it. Once the radio is highlighted, come down to the settings button at the bottom, on the bottom left, click on settings. And if you look under device settings, you'll see that the virtual COM port number box is empty. So here's where you would select your virtual COM port. Now you can actually make this any virtual COM port number you want because this is on your remote computer, so it doesn't have to match up with what's on your host. But I usually, just for the sake of keeping things synchronous, I usually just always select the same COM port. So I'm going to go ahead and say COM18 because that's the COM port that they had on the host. So we'll go ahead and select that. And then we're going to do connect. And with any luck, we should have a connection to our radio. Now I'm going to just tune around here and I tell you, the bands are pretty dead tonight. Okay, so there's the connection to the radio. It also tells us the virtual serial port number is 18. We can go ahead and close that, just OK that box. Now we should be able to bring up the RSBA1 remote software. And the first thing we want to do is you want to go to Options, Connect Setting, and make sure that everything is correct. So the model should already be in there. The connection should be USB. Now, remote utility, last time, it said that there was not used, but this time it will be used because we're actually connecting to this radio. So you see the information in here is the same name as the radio box that we're connected to. Go down and make sure that your COM port is set correctly, that your baud rate and your CIV addresses are set correctly, and those should match the information that is in the radio box. So in the radio box I have 15200 BPS for the baud rate, the CIV address is 94, and the virtual COM port number is 18. So we want to make sure that those three items match the information that is in the radio box. So everything looks good, so we're going to go ahead and OK that. We're going to click on Connect, and now we're connected to our radio. So let me See if we can find.
I'm a physician. I practiced 30 years. I know what people are telling me stuff. So I know what's going on. That's why I asked you the question. It begs the question, by the way.
And there you have it. So we're controlling the radio and listening to the radio over the internet from our remote PC. And I can change, of course, the bands. I could transmit. I can hit the transmit button and actually key the transmitter. If I have, I can either use the microphone on the PC, or I could use a USB microphone or something for the microphone, but it's a fully working remote connection to your radio. We'll shut it down. That's all I have. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Digital Dorsey. Thanks for watching. Also, if you have questions, please contact DX Engineering at dxengineering.com or Digital Dorsey at dxengineering.com. And until next time, 73.